In recent years, Mozambique's economy has been driven by coal and gas discoveries. However, 2 decades after the end of a civil war, the country is facing disruption from former political leaders who feel they have not benefited from the post-conflict dividend. For more on the state of Mozambique's economy, how it's affecting this political turmoil at this point in time is affecting investor sentiment, I'm joined in studio by Pascal Fletcher, Sub-Saharan African Bureau Chief at Reuters. Pascal, thanks for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
So, what are your thoughts pretty much from the outset in terms of what Frelimo is saying right now and how they're responding to Renamo?
Well, I think the fear is that some of the threats that Renamo have made, that they're going to disrupt the main transport corridors and the coal export rail line to Beira Port, seem to be at least showing some signs of coming into effect. We've had a few ambushes this morning, pretty small scale, but must be worrying for both the authorities and investors. So I think the fear is that we might see an escalation of these attacks, and that of course could take some shine of what's been a very positive, growth and investment story for Mozambique in recent years.
And of course we've seen people killed, in fact. And certainly if you were someone who's looking at the Mozambican growth story and haven't got in yet, you might say, okay, well, let's hold out. Do you think that is what could take place, or what could be potentially taking place right now?
Well, you've got some pretty big players already in there. You've got Brazil's Vale, you've got Rio Tinto in the coal sector. You've also got in the natural gas, exploring for natural gas, you've got Eni from Italy and Anadarko from the US. So there's some big players in there. I imagine they're watching the situation very closely. But I imagine others will be looking and sort of thinking, well, where is this going to go? Just how serious could this disruption, where could it lead to? I think many people think it won't lead back to a full-scale war of the kind that really wrecked the country some 25, more than 2 decades ago. It actually brought it to its knees. But still, certainly a source of concern at the moment.
And I'm sure people companies that are operating there would be wanting to look at the safety of their staff that they've got, on the ground in Mozambique right now. There's 2 parts to Mozambique. You've got the kind of mining aspect to it. You've got the gas, you've got coking coal, and then you've also got the tourism aspect. And I'm sure tourists who are thinking about planning a holiday there might also potentially, how do you see the tourism sector being affected by the political turmoil right now?
Well, it's a big country, and I think we need to put it in perspective. These relatively small-scale attacks that we've seen have been taking place in Sofala province in the center, which is a bit of a Renamo stronghold from the old days near their Gorongosa base. I think that perhaps if you are going to some of those beach resorts, in Sofala, particularly in the center of the country, you might want to check on the safety of the roads. But as far as Maputo is concerned, there's no suggestion that Maputo or any other major cities like Beira are particularly under threat. But certainly, isolated parts of highways, some of which pass through, jungle, wooded country, there could be a little bit of a risk there, and that, it seems that's where these sporadic and small attacks are taking place.
But, a few weeks ago, we wouldn't have even been talking, or we haven't been talking about politics in Mozambique for so long. It's all been about the positives, about the growth story there. So what's your assessment as to how the government has been handling, all the investment that's taking place in the country right now and building up infrastructure to support it?
Well, I think there have been some questions about whether enough has been done to provide the infrastructure to develop all these resources. There's been questions about whether the growth that derives from it is inclusive from the social point of view. There's been questions about political inclusion in terms of
that's
Renamo.
a story that we talk about in every African country right now.
That's true, and so, but the aspect hasn't been there is insecurity. We haven't had a security problem. Now we're getting a bit of a security problem, but let's again put it in perspective. Nigeria is one of the most vibrant economies in Africa, and it's got a really serious insurgency from Boko Haram in the north, and yet the two exist side by side. So I think we mustn't over-exaggerate the problem. Clearly there's something that I think the authorities and perhaps visitors and investors need to be worried about, but at the moment it's still pretty small scale, and some people suggest that Renamo is just trying to push and pressure for more room, economic and political room, and don't really want to go back to war, but something to watch very closely, I think.
Do you see potentially SADC getting involved in a situation like this?
Well, I've already seen a report that Zimbabwe is looking closely. We'd heard some reports earlier in the year that Zimbabwe, might even have moved some troops to the frontier. I think earlier this year when there was an attack. And let's not forget that, you know, at the height of the war, it was Zimbabwean and Tanzanian troops who were protecting the Beira corridor, you know, at the height of the war. So, you know, all these things are very, very, you know, closely linked. And the SADC countries, they're all neighbors. They watch very closely. And I imagine, you know, SADC leaders are watching this very carefully.
But from your perspective right now, shouldn't be a kind of an exaggeration in terms of this just because of the sensitivity around the civil war?
No, I think people, you know, shouldn't necessarily be thinking that, oh my God, we're going back to, you know, the terrible war of the, you know, of 75 to 92. But, you know, that said, there does seem to be a little more of a security problem in terms of traveling on roads, not so much on railway so far. We haven't really seen any major attacks on the railway. So, you know, something that I think people definitely have on their radar, yeah.